I was looking on the home page of my browser when an article title caught my attention. The title is 23 Signs You're Secretly a Narcissist Masquerading as a Sensitive Introvert. And that got my attention for several reasons, one of which was the mention of sensitive introvert, because I know a lot of us have labeled ourselves as sensitive introverts. The article started by criticizing things that are written out there about introversion and the stereotypes which are associated with it. The man who wrote this article said that someone will say a shy person is an introvert when shyness is really a character trait more than a sign of introversion. So I can agree with all that, but it went from that to talking about narcissism, and then the author of the article asked the question, have you ever met someone who constantly tells you how sensitive and introverted they are, but all you actually see is selfishness and egocentricity? I'm sure you have, because these people exist in spades. So then he goes on to discuss narcissists and the different types we have seen put forth these past few years, such as covert and overt. And I read down through all that, and then I found something even more interesting to me. He was talking about how these two faculty members at a college in Massachusetts, how their research found a moderate correlation between covert narcissism and the highly sensitive person scale, which was developed by Elaine Aron. It says here in the article, quote, in other words, while introversion, sensitivity, and narcissism are all partially separate traits, hypersensitive covert narcissists are more likely to report they're introverted and sensitive. End quote. So, of course, now he's going to go into, are you a covert narcissist masquerading as a sensitive introvert? Well, there's a test you can take. How lovely, right? You can take a test to see if you're a covert narcissist who says, no, I'm a highly sensitive person instead. So here's the test. I found this statement kind of ironic. Be honest with yourself. Okay, that's the first problem. Maybe not the first, but that's a big problem right there. Because we all know true narcissists are nothing but honest, right? So the whole premise here hinges on whether a narcissist is going to answer honestly, which is laughable. He gives you the typical scale for filling in your answers. Number 1 being very uncharacteristic. You strongly disagree with the statement. To number 5 where you strongly agree. As I scrolled through the statements, I was immediately struck by the fact that these statements describe me. So, number 1, I can become entirely absorbed in thinking about my personal affairs, my health, my cares, or my relations to others. Number 2, my feelings are easily hurt by ridicule or the slighting remarks of others. Number 5, I feel that I have enough on my hand without worrying about other people's troubles. Number 7, I often interpret the remarks of others in a personal way. Number 8, I easily become wrapped up in my own interests and forget the existence of others. Number 12, I tend to feel humiliated when criticized. Number 13, I wonder why other people aren't more appreciative of my good qualities. Number 14, I tend to see other people as being either great or terrible. Number 16, I am especially sensitive to success and failure. Number 17, I have problems that nobody else seems to understand. Number 19, my secret thoughts, feelings, and actions would horrify some of my friends. Number 21, even when I am in a group of friends, I often feel very alone and uneasy. And number 23, defeat or disappointment usually shame or anger me, but I try not to show it. It sounds like an INFJ profile, doesn't it? What I did here was kind of went through this quiz and kind of read to you the statements which jumped out to me immediately. Now, there are a few on here I don't relate to at all, but for the most part, there's a whole lot I'd say I related to, right? Well, after you put all your numbers in, you add them all up, and then you get your rating. Interestingly enough, it says, in a recent study conducted on college students, the average score on this scale was in the mid to upper 60s. So if your score hovered around that range, you are about average in covert narcissism. If your score was below 40, you scored very low in covert narcissism. If, however, your score was 82 or above, you scored high in covert narcissism. And if your score was above 97, well, you might want to own yourself as a card-carrying covert narcissist instead of constantly telling people to stop criticizing you because your sensitive, introverted soul can't handle it. Take a minute. You can pause this video if you want. Use your critical thinking skills to see what's the problem here with this conclusion. If you've ever experienced true narcissistic abuse, you might be able to answer this fairly quickly. Or if you have a logical mind, you might be able to answer this fairly quickly. A true narcissist, someone who truly has the personality disorder, they are not self-aware at all. And I know this because this was my father. Here's a story for some context. I clearly remember a time when I was a young professional in the teaching field. We had an in-service where there was a personality test administered to us, and we talked about it in the scope of understanding our students as well as our fellow teachers. I don't remember what it was called, but it was based on colors. Are you a blue color, a purple color, a green color, etc.? I was interested in it, as many of us are interested in anything to do with people and psychology. I went home for a visit not much later to visit my parents. We sat in the living room, and I think one or two of my sisters were there, and I asked my parents the questions out loud. I think I actually did this for all of my family members who were there at the time, but I gave it to my mother first, and her results came out very accurately. For how I perceived my mother, her results were very accurate. I think she answered the questions accurately and from a very good place of self-awareness. Then I asked my father the questions. My father answered all the questions completely opposite from how he truly was. So if it would say, I'm trying to think of a good example, like, do you consider yourself a good listener or something like that? He would say, oh yes, I'm a great listener, when in fact he was actually a terrible listener. He was answering the questions from a place of how he saw himself, or perhaps how he wished to be, but not how he truly was. And I remember clearly my mother arguing with him a bit. She was giggling a little bit at his lack of self-awareness. She said my father's name and she said, "You're not like that. You're like this. This is the correct answer." And my father got very angry. Now, of course, at the time, I didn't understand what I understand now about this disorder. None of us did. So he got very angry, and the whole thing did not have a very good ending. And we were all sitting there thinking, he couldn't be any further from the correct answer. He was so out there and nowhere near accurate responses for himself. He had no idea who he was. And I'll always remember that. That day stands out in my mind for so many reasons. So going back to our article here, interesting. If I took this test in all honesty right now and scored correctly those statements I read out to you, and I called out the ones that I know are me to a T, I would probably score above 97, and according to the article, I should call myself a card-carrying covert narcissist. Now, if my father had taken this test, my father would probably have gotten below a 40, and he would have scored very low in covert narcissism. So what does that tell you? Lest you think this article was written by some amateur armchair psychologist, you can read his biography for yourself. This man has a PhD. He's a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. And he was voted as one of the 50 groundbreaking scientists who are changing the way we see the world. And he speaks here about narcissism as an expert. And yet he's missed something huge here. A narcissist is not self-aware. If you ask me, people who would score very low on this test are either one of two things. They are either true narcissists, meaning they have the personality disorder, malignant narcissism, or number two, they are completely not self-aware. And if your score is high, you are a very self-aware INFJ person. You are painfully aware of your weaknesses as well as your strengths. When I looked at the statements on this test, I thought to myself, yes, this was or is me. But it's not so simple as putting up a number to rate myself, because what this man obviously paints in a negative light may or may not be so. In this test, all of these statements appear to be qualities one should strive not to have. But is this true? Look down through the list yourself. My feelings are easily hurt by ridicule or the slighting remarks of others. Yes, this is true of me. Yes, this isn't a good thing because I recognize I shouldn't allow myself to experience this because it's coming from a place of pride or egotistical thought. So yes, my feelings are easily hurt. They still are, but I recognize it and I tell myself stop, and I ask myself, is this personal against you? Is this something you should consider and take into account and not be so hypersensitive to it? However, on the reverse side, how many of these qualities could be turned around and be made to seen as positive qualities or as something necessary in certain individuals for them to be able to accomplish certain things in the world? In other words, a sensitive person, a truly sensitive person, is going to see things another will not. They will be perceptive in that way. Is this a negative thing, such as the author of this article has said here, or is it really a gift when used properly? Only self-awareness can answer those questions. So in reading through all these statements, I can analyze myself. In other words, I can introspect immediately and say, yes, this was or is a problem, because I am a work in progress. But the irony in all this is, had I taken this test when I was a 20-year-old, I would have scored very low on the test because I was largely not self-aware. I would not have perceived this to be myself. I wouldn't have been able to be honest with myself. My feelings are easily hurt by ridicule. No, that's not me. I would have said it wasn't me, because to say that it is me is to acknowledge something about myself I don't want to acknowledge. Because it says something about me that's deeper. There's a deeper problem there. Why am I so sensitive to ridicule or criticism? Why am I so sensitive to this? What does it tell me about myself? It suggests I'm uncomfortable with myself deep down for some reason or another. It suggests I don't understand myself or what I'm all about. Self-awareness allows you to introspect on these things and discover the purpose behind why you are the way you are. To be sensitive to the world around you is not a bad thing. It's a quality that needs to be tempered rather than discarded. I would have scored extremely low on this test in my younger years. And I could have patted myself on the back and said, no, I'm not a narcissist. I don't have a personality disorder. And yes, while I would have been correct in that conclusion, I would have missed the fact that I was not off the hook. That the results of this test suggested something else inside of me, which was a complete ignorance of who I was as a human being. And this would have been something I shared with my father. And this is one of the reasons I believe an INFJ who lacks self-awareness is a target for true malignant narcissists. This test completely destroys what it sets out to do. It berates people for what is actually true self-awareness, calling those who see themselves honestly as narcissistic and self-centered, while actually encouraging people in what truly is their sensitive, introverted delusions. It berates someone like me who knows there's a purpose in the way I am and behave. It just shows me how useless these tests really are. And it also tells me something larger about a society where this kind of thinking is considered groundbreaking. I thought this would be an interesting example to share with you when you read these things, when you are coming from a place of self-awareness and when you have learned the skill of critical thinking. It's interesting how, as an INFJ, these two things can collide. Because it's my critical thinking which allows me to look at an article like this and to immediately rip it apart in a logical sort of way. But it's my self-awareness which allows me to come to conclusions about what I've read. Maybe some of you might be led to some other interesting conclusions based on what I said, because I think as introverted intuitive dominants, we do stir up thoughts in one another. We kind of lead one another in this way. So what do you think of this and my conclusion? As always, I welcome respectful dialogue.